The Sudan crisis, which has gone on for more than 2 weeks, has left hundreds of lives lost and many displaced from their homes. For many non-indigenous of the country, including Nigerians, the evacuation process has begun. The federal government has said more than 4,000 Nigerians were caught in the middle of the crisis, of which about 637 have been evacuated to the Egyptian border. After days of delay from the Egyptian officials to open its borders due to stringent conditions, they finally agreed after the intervention of President Muhammadu Buhari. The chairman of Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Abike Dabiri Erewa, confirmed that there is an Air Force plane already on the ground in Aswan, Egypt, where the processing of the first set of evacuees will begin to Nigeria. Well, joining us in the studio to discuss more on this is a lecturer of the Nigerian Institute of Journalism, G.D. Johnson. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Good morning to our viewers all over the world. Thank you for having me.
Right. Finally, like we have pointed out, the Egyptian border has been open to Nigerians to come in. This thanks to the president's intervention. He spoke with, he's reported that he spoke with the president there, and this is why we can see the borders being open. But before then, there were communications between both countries, and one wonders how it is that the president had to come in to ensure that the borders were open for Nigerians to come in, because at some point we got reports that Nigerians were not allowed to come in.
Well, Nigeria closed its border to its neighbors, Republic of Benin, and the rest of it. So you require intervention at that level to happen, and you could have such intervention should have come earlier. That's my view with respect to opening and closing of the border, because we all are witnessing the carnage happening in Sudan, and if that has happened, let's say in Republic of Benin or say in Niger Republic, what do you think will be the natural response of Nigeria? The natural response of Nigeria will have been to close the border, and Egyptian closing the border is not out of place, but is our own reaction, how proactive we are in responding to issues that is called to question. And I think it's as a result of us having a multiplicity of agencies dealing with this issue. Which agency is actually responsible for the evacuation? If you look at it, is it NIDCOM? Is it NEMA? Is it NEMA? Or Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Services, or Ministry of Foreign Affairs? So that lack of coordination in terms of these agencies that are involved in the evacuation created a lot of, I won't want to say chaos, but imbalance in the approach towards evacuating the Nigerians that we have in Sudan. So it had to take the intervention of the president talking to the Egyptian president before the border is open. So there is fault on the part of agencies of government doing what they are supposed to do, and on the part of Nigerians too. Don't forget that it behoves on you as a citizen of a country if you traveled outside the shores of your country. A lot of Nigerians tend to neglect this. You need to register your presence with the embassy of your country. For example, I go to Sudan, I go to Ghana, or I go... These are requirements so that when such things happen, it is easier for agencies of government or relevant bodies to track you as a person. So you have a responsibility as a citizen to do that. The government also has a responsibility to take care of you when you're in foreign land.
Well, that seems nice on paper. The question is, there seems to be a disconnect between embassies and Nigerian citizens abroad. You cannot even get your passport. They cannot communicate with you on that. Do they even have any file or any database on who is in the country? And when the time comes, do they know where to find it?
Well, yeah, that's another area in which we need to look into. How do our foreign missions treat? In 2008, I recall we were organizing a program, and some people wanted to come from United Kingdom to Nigeria. It was pretty difficult, and from friends I've heard that it's very difficult for you to get Nigerian passport abroad or to get Nigerian visa, even if you are traveling back to Nigeria. It's as difficult as trying to get the visas of Western countries in Nigeria. So that itself is another thing that we need to look at, the state of the affairs of our foreign mission. What are they actually doing? If you begin to look at this Sudan issue, you know, when the crisis broke out, what were our missions? Even it doesn't have to take the intervention of NEMA, NITCOM, and other agencies. At least
you
have ambassadors, you have cultural attaché, you have education attaché. There are different officers that are being paid by the taxpayers, that this is their core function. And like he pointed out, we could see failure, a systemic failure in terms of the foreign mission we have in Sudan.
Now there's also the aspect of the NITCOM boss talking about the conditions being given, and they're terming it as being stringent. If you look at some of the conditions, details and the schedule of the aircraft, capacity of the aircraft, strong pledge that once our citizens depart the border, they will be conveyed directly to designated airport, standby buses that will immediately convey them to the airport, flight of students, and all of that. I'm wondering what you would make of these conditions if they are stringent, as they are saying. Because one would expect that these are normal things that one would expect. So why are you saying it's stringent? Is it because we do not have or follow due processes as a country?
They are stringent if you look at it in the spirit of African Union. But in the spirit of normal protocol, in terms of having crisis in one country and not allowing to spill over into your own country. Don't forget that the Arab world, you know, the Arab Spring, the outcome of the Arab Spring, and which led to change of government in Tunisia. Tunisia has not recovered from it. Libya has not recovered from it. Egypt has just been able. Egypt is just managing its own internal crisis. Don't forget that El-Sisi came in through a coup and he transmuted himself to be a civilian president, similar to what is happening in Sudan. So I'm sure they don't want to import what is happening in Sudan into Egypt, because Egypt has its own attendant problem. So that's why this condition, which we call stringent, is a normal protocol. However, in the spirit of African Union, which you think that there should be freedom of movement, exchange of ideas, and the rest of it, you wouldn't be expecting that African countries will be providing these conditionalities for fellow African countries to move in and out of their country, using their country as an exit route to back to their home country. So
does this not expose the inefficiencies, or let me say the weakness of the African Union at this time? That we are not hearing anything from African Union in terms of muscling its way, coordinating the matters, talking to foreign governments,
talking to
trying
countries
to coordinate
within the union.
Trying to help in serving as a nucleus for African countries coming together to solve this problem of refugees.
When you look at the reactions of prehistoric African countries, when I talk about Ethiopia, you recall the Ethiopia not allowing Nigerians to come in Sudan and Egypt and their reaction, and then these are founding African nations, and you see that they've not embraced the totality of what African Union is all about. And like we have pointed out, even we have not seen any statement from African Union with respect to the carnage that is happening in Sudan. What is happening in Sudan, it should be a lesson to every other African nation with respect to those that are calling for military intervention in the political system of any given country. So there are lessons for us to learn from what is happening in Sudan. And there are lessons to be learned from African Union. You don't have to go to Russia, being packaged in a bus, or go to China. You know, African leaders tend to take leadership instruction. Used to be United States and Great Britain and France. Now it is China and Russia that are trying to play dominant role in shaping the foreign policy and the internal relationship between countries in Africa. It shouldn't be happening. We have African Union. And if African Union as a body cannot come in and intervene in crises affecting fellow African countries, I think there's the need for us to disband the union and look for other
we made a point last week about this idea of interim government, that the people that this should be a cautionary tale
Yes.
to those making those points. But interestingly, most of the people evacuated, or we expect to be evacuated, are young people who never knew military, who didn't know. They were probably in diapers when military, that's the oldest of them, actually were in diapers when the military was
in power.
And when they're not in diapers, they're still running about the compound, not knowing the difference between uniformed man and civilian in power. Now, we expect that now that this thing has happened, maybe these people who have not been evacuated can be evangelists, evangelists of democracy to their own generation and tell them, this is what we saw in Sudan. This is not what we want here.
You see, when we say when there's armed conflict, the people that suffered most are women, children, and the aged. And the aged. And the major casualty are the younger generation, because whether you like it or not, you are recruited into the army, either voluntarily or involuntarily. And so when people fans the embers of war, when they flame the fire of disunity, these are the things that it could likely lead to. You could just see what has happened to Sudan in Khartoum, the crossfire exchanges and the rest of it happening, and I think it's a lesson for all of us to learn. And I think that coming home to the issue of the evacuation or no evacuation, I think that we need to spell out the roles and responsibility of agencies. Which agency is actually responsible? When something, you see, we had the Ukraine issue.
Yes.
We had the Ukraine issue. We had the issues for those moving into. You recall that Poland to close their borders when some of these issues happen. The natural reaction is to stem the flow of refugees into your country. What the first thing you do is to close your border. But the most important thing is for you as a nation to take care of your own citizen. And how do you go about it? Is for us to have a coordinated approach. Which agency? And I think in view of what is happening globally, I think that there should be an agency, probably an interministerial agency created for that purpose when something of this nature happens, because you can't prevent crisis from happening. Crisis will always happen. When you have forces, different forces trying to take control and reign of power and not following democratic means, you have this type of crisis you're having in Sudan, and you have in Libya, you have across the globe.
Now, you mentioned something that I would like for you to expatiate on, talking about taking care of your people at home, because the majority of these persons that traveled to these countries were in search of one thing or the other. Some greener pastures, education, business, and all of it. Even the same thing when you talk about the Ukraine crisis. What should we begin to look into as people at home to addressing these matters? Yes, you can't stop people from migrating in search of whatever it is, but there has to be some level of, some level of things put in place that will make people stay back to, maybe after looking at the crisis now, they can say, okay, we have this at home, we do not need to travel.
Veronica, you pointed out migration, legal migration is as old as mankind history. There are loads of foreigners in Nigeria. You see, migration is a key component part of human adventure. So no matter whatever system you put in place, people always migrate. However, what we should speak against is illegal migration. If you are migrating, migrate legally. Document your movement with the relevant agencies. Let them know where you are, what you do, and the rest of it. You look, people are seeking opportunities. Even in Nigeria, you see, one of the things my pastor used to say is that you need to go to the international airport. People say there are no opportunities in Nigeria. He said all you just need to do is to look at the departure lounge and the arrival lounge. That in the departure lounge, you see Nigerians living in droves, and then you see foreigners coming in droves into Nigeria. And so it's a function of perspective. What are the perspective? No matter how bad you think a country is, there are opportunities there. So there are loads and opportunities for us in this country. However, there's a need for government to still create enabling environment. Enabling environment in which that people will not have to seek educational, we don't have to have educational tourism, because the incessant strike of ASU is a contributing factor. We hope the new government coming in will do something with respect to the educational sector so that we have regular calendar that we say 3 years is 3 years, we say 4 years is 4 years. That will prevent people from going for educational. You know, a lot of migration we have had to United Kingdom, Canada, based on education migration. Once we sort that out, I can tell you, majority of those that are affected there are students. Those that we have seen, majority of them are students. And why? Because they've gone to seek better educational opportunities in Sudan. And some have asked the question, why Sudan? Sudan is one of the prehistoric nations in Africa.
Well, you made a good point there by saying that, you know, some people are coming into this country and we need an enabling environment. Was it not an enabling environment that made that created the opportunities for those who come into the country? That's just by the way. The fact that this is now a more globalized world than it used to be, and that we have more people living this country, creates the expectation that we are going to have more and more of such scenarios. Because if anything breaks down, we're going to have more people. I mean, 20 years ago, we would expect that we have so many people in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Or even in Sudan. But now, if any country in the world, you are bound to expect that they're going to be Nigerians. So, how urgent is this matter of getting a coordinated template? You know, you don't have to say when the thing happens, then you start looking for funds. The funds are supposed to be there. Now they're saying that no, we don't want to put money there. They are not important. NITCOM is not important. NIMA is not important. That's what happened during the time of last year with flooding. Yes. That even the state governments, they have environmental agencies and all of that, and Ministry of Environments and so on. But they don't fund them because they feel what is environment. But the world has changed. The world is about environment now. Anything is about environment. So, how urgent and how do we go about coordinating this? Because that's what happened to America after 9/11. That they didn't know about it. They didn't respond because different agencies had different information that if coordinated, they will have known that this was going to happen.
Yeah, like, you know, that's what led to the establishment of the 13th Department, Homeland Security, because the security agencies were working independent of one another. So the Homeland Security is as a coordinating ministry where agencies can share. So we need that interagency responsibility. You know, which ministry are we going to hold accountable on this one? And it must be funded. And when people say they don't have the funds, there are funds. It's just that the budget head, every local government has budget on social welfare. Every state government has budget on social welfare. You need just go and look into their books. Every federal government has budget on. Okay, the money that was being shared during COVID, where did the money come from? There is a lot of fund in the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. So now I think that don't come into my budget. You can't dip your hand into my budget. I think that it is the politics of the money that comes in now. And that's why we said there is the need for us to have a template. A template in just imagine if there is crisis in Great Britain. You know how many Nigerians are in Great Britain?
In Canada.
In Canada. US. So everywhere you go, we are in a globalized world, as pointed out early. So everywhere you go into the world, anywhere, any country you go into the world, you find Nigerians there. So what will be our response? America responded by creating Ministry of Homeland Security, Department of Homeland Security. We need to create an agency. We need to create so that there is a template, there is ready-made funding. If you don't spend the money at the end of the year, you return it back to the treasury, and then you rebudget money for that. Yeah, well, you see, people tend to think that some things are not possible. That Nigeria is a rogue nation. I can tell you that there are loads of people with credibility and with character and integrity in Nigeria. Otherwise, this country will have collapsed.
Now, that begs the question of, are we really learning lessons? Because earlier we mentioned the matter of the Ukraine-Russia crisis. We've talked about the South Africa's xenophobic attacks and how it is that we had to evacuate people, you know, this fire brigade approach. And now we're having the Sudan crisis again. What would it take for us to begin to sit down and say, you know what, we need to have a template like we have been talking about and address these matters? We should be learning our lessons by now.
Well, I think one of the major drawback of this administration is that there's no trust with its foreign policy. And that's one. And two, the leadership of Nigerian foreign affairs, that's at the ministerial level, seems to be laid back. That's my opinion. I might be wrong, but that's my opinion with respect to the trust of our foreign policy. And I think that everything rises and falls on leadership, according to John Maxwell. So when you have, and it's a lesson to be learned for the incoming administration with respect to who is given the responsibility of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, because the Foreign Affairs Ministry projects either how powerful, how vibrant, how active a nation is. So when you have a laid-back personality, it tends to affect the overall impression and the overall attitude of how you go about your foreign policy. And that for me, it's an action that must be taken, because if you have a proactive Minister of Foreign Affairs, I think some of these issues we are seeing wouldn't have. You don't even need the intervention of the president. The Minister of Foreign Affairs will have interacted with his fellow foreign affairs minister in Egypt or Ethiopia and the rest of it, and all of these issues.
In how many of these countries did in Europe, did you hear the leaders of the country talk about Egypt? Yes. Sorry, talk about Egypt or Sudan. They didn't. Although in America, some citizens there say America is just like Nigeria in this matter, that America did not respond as well. But America asked other countries to help. Belgium and all to evacuate their citizens. So that's power. So that's also a form of response.
Now, the UN is concerned with the manner this crisis is going and saying that the region could be consumed by the crisis if nothing is done swiftly. I'm wondering if you see an AU, what you would expect the AU to do with regards to addressing this crisis.
You know, if you look at the Sudan crisis that started in 1983 that led to South Sudan being an independent country from when people use ethnicity, religion, and the rest of it as part and parcel of politics, that's what you see that has happened in Sudan. And like I said, it's a lesson for all of us to learn with respect to what is happening in Sudan, because we almost share similar attributes. Sudan shares similar attributes with Nigeria until South Sudan was carved out of Sudan. For me, AU just exists on paper. That's the reality. That's the reality of it. In what way has AU intervened in Libya crisis, in crisis in Mali, crisis in Guinea? You know, you can begin to mention all of this, and sometimes some conspiracy theories will say that, oh, you know what, it is the Western world that does not want Western powers that does not want African countries to be settled so that they can make them of their national resources. Okay, if someone is coming to your household to cause crisis, why can't the elders in your community come together and put their heads together in order to resolve?
How can the elders meet? When before they meet, this one has been given onion ring to eat. The other one has been given eba to eat. The other one has been given bangasu. So before you eat finish, everybody's on the So
that's the challenge, because for me, I don't see the solving African problem if we have real economic integration. If we really have real economic, and that's why I love what Professor Lumumba said, that why should I go to Ghana and be spending dollar? Why can't I spend naira in Ghana? Why can't a Ghanaian spend CD in Nigeria? Until we have full economic integration, the political problems in Africa cannot be solved. But how do we solve this full economic integration when we run cap in hands to get Gary ever. So,
Some have said.
That's the problem.
That's not belittling the issue, but that's the reality. That's the sad reality we are faced we faced with. You recall in the 60s when we really have Afrocentric leadership, and I think that is the direction, the new leadership that is coming into power in Africa. That's the direction we should be looking. Let Africa look. China cut itself off from the world for close to 50 years, and by the time China will open up to the world, China became what? A global power. So there's the need for us to look inward in Africa, for us to have economic integration. And it's a challenge for leadership. And Nigeria has a critical role to play in this. Egypt has a critical role to play in this. South Africa has a critical role to play in this. This unhealthy rivalry between Nigeria, Egypt, and South Africa, we need to sheath the sword. We need to come together and provide direction for the most endowed continent. Unfortunately, Africa is the most endowed continent, and yet is the poorest.
Yes, it's just like a man who wants to go to the ring and is full of muscles. He has no skill. The man who doesn't have muscles but has skill will beat him.
Yeah,
that's it. That's what Yoruba say, that wisdom is better than strength.
Yeah.
So it's the absence of wisdom that is afflicting us.
Right. So do you see this country now, Sudan, embracing democracy?
Well, the crisis was caused because the long-standing prime minister was there, and he was toppled by military through a military coup. The military promised transition to democratic governance, and 3-4 years down the line, it's still the same of the same, and we see different factions. And you see, when you raise, you know the armed forces and the paramilitary, you know, they are the famed Janjaweed, the Janjaweed that prosecuted the Darfur massacre. Yeah. So no matter how hard it rains, it will never wash the black spot in a leopard. There's a crisis that has been permeated Sudan before the breaking of Sudan into two, us having South Sudan and Sudan. I don't think democracy will solve the problem of Sudan, because who is going to superintend that democracy? Now, who is going to superintend that democracy whereby people have access to? One question: how do they get access to those ammunitions they are using? Who are those supplying them?
Yeah, there are all kinds of things. You know that Sudan is sitting on wealth, mineral resources, and the Russians are there through the Wagner Group. They are there making deals and buying weapons. The Americans want their gold. Everybody wants a part of them, so, and they don't want to take care. They don't want to become. They don't want to part with all the wealth.
So Sudan is Ukraine of Africa, and you could see the Western world rushing to defend Ukraine, and the Western world is playing the ostrich. So it's a lesson for Africans to learn that when you allow your country to be turned to a buffer zone where the Western and the Eastern blocs are trying to fight for control, you'll be the one that will pay the price. It's an average Sudanese, an African.
Those who are saying that they want to split the country. Sudan got split. They have Christians in the south, Muslims, and they're still fighting each other. And so we should be very careful when we say our lessons. When we say, I want to go. Yeah, everybody will know that
Look at Sudan. Look at Yugoslavia from history. Look at Sudan. Look at Yugoslavia. These are countries that Nigeria shares similarities with.
All right, we have to leave the conversation here now. Jide Johnson, thank you for your time.
It's a pleasure to be with you. It's a pleasure to be with you, Sam.
All right.
And with our viewers at home.